You're live.
Okay, so hi, good morning everyone. Today we're talking about the 2025 Los Angeles fires. My name is Lynn.
And I'm Juwon. And we actually chose this topic because we both lived in LA at one point in our lives. You went to
I went to UCLA.
And I grew up in Orange County, which is an hour south from LA. And when this was happening, I was actually in California, so I was keeping up with the updates, and this was very personal because I think if you grow up in Southern California, you know at least one family or one person who was affected by both the Altadena fire and the Palisades fire, which were the two biggest ones.
Okay, so just to clarify, there were numerous fires. We've touched upon Palisades and Eden, but there was also Hearst. So just a quick overview. The Palisades fire, which is right here, started east of Malibu, began January 7th as a brush fire. Eaton up here, just hours after the Palisades fire began, this blaze started near a canyon just north of downtown Los Angeles in Altadena. And then the Hearst fire is actually up here, and it also started on January 7th, smaller than the other two, but it began in the northern area of Los Angeles County. In this presentation, we're going to focus more on discussing Eaton and Palisades, but just to give you like an overview of the day that everything started. So the Palisades fire, some background. Started on January 7th. It grew to destroy large areas of the Pacific Palisades, Topanga, Malibu. It was fully contained after 24 days, so that was on January 31st. It destroyed about 6,800 structures, led to 12 deaths, and it's noted as the 10th deadliest and third most destructive California wildfire on record. It's noted as the most destructive in the city of Los Angeles currently. And just more of a detailed timeline. So on January 1st, actually 6 days prior to the beginning of the Palisades fire, there had been another fire northeast of the Pacific Palisades, which was called the Lockman Fire. At 4 a.m. on that day, the fire department had noted that the Lockman Fire was contained after it burned around 8 acres. So it was much smaller, occurred January 1st. And then January 7th, around 10:15, a homeowner in the Pacific Palisades noted that he saw some smoke near the site of the prior Lockman Fire. He called 911. Around 10:30 a.m., the firefighters reported seeing some smoke, and they started to divert all of their resources towards the Palisades on January 7th. By 11:30, the fire grew to 200 acres, and then by 12:20, the first evacuation order went into effect in the Pacific Palisades. And by 1:40, the fire had grown to 300 acres. And then fast forward, by 7:30 p.m. that night, it had nearly consumed 3,000 acres. So it grew rapidly on January 7th throughout the day. And then by January 12th, the fire had grown to 23,000 or 24,000 acres. So these are some of the initial images that were taken when it began on January 7th. And this is an emergency alert that went out to people in the area. And then just to contrast that, the Eaton fire, which again was on this side, so basically all of this was happening in the Palisades, and then around 6:18 p.m., CAL FIRE reported that the Eaton fire had begun in Altadena, and they described the incident as a fast-moving fire burning brush fueled by high winds, which I'll go into in a little bit. And then to contrast, January 12th, Palisades had experienced about 23,000 or 24,000 acres of fire, and the Eaton fire had reached around or a little above 14,000 acres. So they're happening concurrently, and obviously this is overwhelming the system. So the Eaton fire itself, January 7th, 6:18 p.m., emerged in Altadena. January 8th, by 9 a.m., it had consumed 2,200 acres. By 1:20 p.m., 10,600 acres, fast growing. It was fully contained at the same time as the Palisades. 24 days later, on the 31st of January, it destroyed about 9,000 buildings and counting. Led to 17 deaths, which is higher than in Palisades. It was the 5th deadliest and 2nd most destructive wildfire in California. So both of these are happening simultaneously, leading to massive destruction in the neighborhoods.
And I just wanted to give a bit of a perspective on like what the neighborhoods were like. So Pacific Palisades, this is just a Zillow screenshot of homes that were sold recently, so before the fire. And you know, you see homes that are like 2 million, 3 million, but also there's one that's like $23 million. And then Altadena, which is another neighborhood near Pasadena, is, you have homes a little bit under $1 million or 1.5-ish. And I remember reading an article about, like, during COVID, because home prices were getting so expensive in California, and saying people are moving to Altadena because the homes are a little bit more affordable, like starting in the millions versus like 3, 4, 5 million in the other areas. So Altadena was one of those. It had people who were old and living there for a long time, but it also had new people moving in who were young, and young couples moving in to start a family as well.
So immediate causes. So there's a lot of theories out there. So far, what we've been able to glean is that the Palisades fire, there's a theory that it possibly was due to the reignition of the Lockman fire, which occurred 6 days prior. Or people have said maybe it's just a new fire that just started spontaneously, or that it was due to a downed power line. Now, for there being the Lockman theory, Lockman fire might have been due to fireworks. It happened right on like January 1st, so there's that theory for Lockman. But nearest power line, when they started evaluating the damage, they had seen in images or videos that the nearest power line was still intact once this fire actually began. So the idea of a down power line is less likely. So here they were considering the causes as being more of a human-caused fire. Also, the point of origin was near a popular hiking trail. So it could have been something spontaneous that occurred on January 7th. The Eaton fire, now people are pointing more towards this being caused by power lines operated by the Southern California Edison Company. They had done some recent renovations, or there were some discussions about their power lines in the area, and so that's more likely the cause of the Eaton fire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a lot of concern for it being arson, and there were videos of arsonists. And the reason people speculate that is because when there's a fire, people evacuate, and then there's professional gangs that will come to loot, and that's been a known thing in California. So there's a lot of thoughts and speculations as to what caused it.
And also, just to understand the background, it was this perfect recipe for the wildfires. So environmental conditions, the southern coast had 8 months without measurable rainfall. There was also moderate drought conditions throughout the region. Wind condition, if you guys know the Santa Ana winds, it's a strong high pressure system over the Great Basin, causes a steep pressure gradient which triggers these winds. And the forecasted gusts were 60 to 80 miles per hour, but peak gusts in that mountainous area, or mountainous regions, went up to 90 miles per hour. And so actually persistent windstorm conditions January 7th night made it really difficult for them to manage the spread initially, so that's how it just grew exponentially. And then also official warnings, so there were actually red flag warnings that were issued on January 6th. Again, both of these started January 7th. And the red flag warnings for several different neighborhoods that were affected, and in the warnings they had noted life-threatening windstorm warnings, and residents were warned to avoid potential fire triggers. And just to note, so this is sort of a map of the Santa Ana winds. I'm not very good at reading these maps. So, but here you'll see the average annual temperature has been increasing steadily in California. So this is in the 1900s, and then here it's predicted 2030. So there's sort of this projection of just an increase in temperature overall in California.
So along with that, this is not the first time California's had a fire. This is a known thing where we have Santa Ana winds frequently every year, and with the perfect recipe, it causes a fire. So this was actually 2020. California had another big fire in the Northern California area, I believe, and Trump, this was when Trump was president, so he had visited Governor Newsom, who's still the governor today, and then this were some of the tweets from 2019 before the 2020 fire, and Trump has repeatedly talked about the importance of forest management, such as cleaning the forest, cleaning the debris, and doing controlled burns. However, California is very progressive, and there's a lot of interest from political activists and environmentalists that say controlled burns are bad for the environment. So then California hasn't been able to do sufficient controlled burns, and that's one of the debates that's been happening. I don't know if you guys have heard in the side of Florida, just seeing the media talk about Trump versus Newsom, and so that's kind of what the debate's about. Trump is saying that California needs to do more, and that they haven't done sufficient management. And so yeah, that was 2019, and they're saying the same thing in 2025. when it happened. So why did the fire spread so much? And Lynn talked about the wind, which is definitely a big factor. But also, some of the things that people were very angry about during the time was that the reservoir, this is a reservoir next to Pacific Palisades, was empty. It was empty for months, almost a year. And then the second thing was empty fire hydrants. So one of the big things that was happening as people were fighting the fire was that the fire hydrants were empty. So firefighters would show up to these neighborhoods to fight the fire, and the fire hydrants would not work. So that's very frustrating for all the people who live there. And then through insufficient management, talking about like the cleaning of the forest, cleaning of debris, they weren't doing that, and there were budget cuts that were in place where they didn't allocate money to clean up the forest, because if you have dry leaves, which California is very dry, that's a perfect recipe for fires. So these are some of the reasons, and this is a news article from AP News about fire hydrants running dry when they were needed most, and that's why it just grew exponentially to thousands and tens of thousands of acres, because they weren't able to control it in the beginning. And then I wanted to kind of touch on the regulations in California and its effects, and I think this is perfect for this class because we talk about like our policies on and regulations and the effects on the environment. So in 2014, California passed Proposition 1, which allocated $2.7 billion of investments to build more reservoirs. So, the idea is we need reservoirs in cases of drought, which we know we're gonna have, we need to store water. And we invested $2.7 billion, this is almost 10 years ago. However, no reservoir has been built yet. No reservoir has been built yet. So that's another thing that was frustrating for Californians living there. And this is from the government website that I copied. And these are, I think, some of the options for the reservoir sites that they have. And you probably can't see it, but this is 2023. So, and this is final award hearing, then construction begins, then facility operational. So all of this, because of regulation and the slowness of government in California, the final award hearing, the first one is set to 2023, and the rest are 2026, 2028, which is a little bit ridiculous for a proposition that was passed 10 years ago for us to have nothing. So people were upset about that. And then controlled burns. I don't know how familiar everybody is with controlled burns, but actually this is a long practice, and the Native American groups who lived in California, they regularly did controlled burns, and in other countries around the world, this is something that's well practiced because it shows that this is how we manage the land, and actually burning is better for the growth of forest. So this is a study done by UC Berkeley researchers who talked about controlled burns and the positive effects, long-term positive effects it has on the forest. However, there's been like the Clean Air Act and the Environmental Protection Agency who have tightened air quality standards and made it more difficult to do these controlled burns. And that's definitely one of the reasons why we've had less controlled burns in California and why we're seeing these massive forest fires. And then another big topic was insurance companies. I don't know if you guys have heard about it. This is also true in Florida, where insurance companies are pulling out of states like Florida and California. So something that was also upsetting was thousands of homeowners were dropped from insurance companies months before, like a couple months before the Palisades fire. And so there's multiple sides to this, and I wanted to kind of shed light on both sides. So, people are obviously, when they see this article, they're upset that insurance companies are pulling out because they're supposed to be there for you when you're in need. However, the insurance companies are a for-profit company, as we all know, and they assess the risks of fires in each of these homes, and they said that the risks in California were too high because part of the reason is the geography of the homes that were located, like in the forest, and then secondly because the government wasn't doing enough to manage these fires, like doing controlled burns or cleaning out the debris, and then the California government set price controls for insurance companies, which theoretically sounds like a good idea to set price controls. However, it just made them leave the state. So that's one thing. And then the secondary effects that it has is when you buy a house and you're getting a mortgage, you need a homeowner insurance. But if these homes are not trying to, if these insurances aren't trying to cover you, then there's going to be a decreased housing market activity, which we've already seen happen, and freeze in new housing development because a lot of the developers don't want to develop if they know that these future buyers can't get insurances. So ultimately, this leads to an increased financial risk for homeowners that are currently owning homes, and then the climate change that we're seeing and risk perception definitely is influenced by the insurance companies.
So immediate health and environmental effects. So as we saw in the previous slides, both fires together led to the deaths of 29 people, so that's obviously devastating. There was massive destruction of homes, places of worship, school, nursing homes, businesses, libraries. This is just an image from the Palisades of the destruction, but obviously there's way more. There were more images online. Projected losses of $15 billion, degraded air quality. So in a fire like this, you worry about urban fire-specific toxins, so metals from buildings, lead from car batteries, copper from plumbing, arsenic, and then there's also PVC-related toxins as well. And there's also damaged water systems. So when the Eaton fire actually started, a couple hours later, they had put into effect a no water policy. So just because of the loss of water pressure, you can also allow for bacteria and toxins to build up in the water systems. And so all these areas basically don't have access to water supplies. You have massive displaced communities. You're halting school, work, worship, and so you also disrupt local infrastructure and transportation networks. It's a whole upheaval of a person's life. And so those were sort of the immediate effects. And then when we look at animals in the ocean, looking at direct threat to animals, direct mortality from the flames, loss of food sources, respiratory issues for animals from smoke. There was a documented case of a lion family spotted fleeing across Topanga. Of course, there were more, but this was just in one article. You're losing critical habitats for the animals as well. And then for ocean impacts, you have a lot of the firefighting runoff running into coastal waters. And so you worry about water quality degradation. You also worry about sunlight penetrating like kelp forests and ash effect in general, just changing ocean chemistry, the risk to algae, an increase in phytoplankton growth, and also as well as oxygen depletion overall in marine life. And so that sort of blends itself into sort of the long-term effects. So long-term effects of stormwater seeping into the ground or ocean, as talked about, will disrupt marine life. We worry about long-term physical effects from smoke debris inhalation, and actually now I was looking, there are a lot of studies that are being started now to sort of evaluate people in the long run to see or measure the effects on their health from the fires, because a lot of people, we were talking about this morning, a lot of people do want to go back and rebuild, and so you think about just how, I guess, damaged and destroyed the environment is, and what the effects will be when they do start to rebuild and do live there and do have families there. And so, and then there's also this increased risk of future fires. So here's just a quick graphic. Fire alerts in LA County in the first 4 weeks of the year. This is from 2012 to 2024 in comparison to 2025. So you're seeing this like massive increase in the number of fires that are being reported in LA County just in the first 4 weeks of the year. And when we look at tree cover loss in California has been exponentially increasing, which we know will further increase temperature rises. And then also we have to consider the mental health impact, long-term impact on mental health, just because again, there's this huge upheaval of communities and families and relationships and businesses, and so that's something that we'll have to watch moving forward as well.
Yeah, and one thing we also wanted to touch on was health disparities. So it's, one of the interesting things about this natural disaster, and I've seen this on the news, is talking about how usually people who are financially wealthy or higher socioeconomic status, they usually are excused from, they can avoid these types of natural disasters, but never has an incident happened in the recent time where you see so many celebrities and CEOs and physicians and lawyers, like owners of tent firms be affected all at once in such a grand scale, as well as the communities in Altadena, which is not as wealthy as the Palisades. So, you know, we had a lot of celebrities be affected, and when they were posting, I'm sure you all saw in Florida, like the effects of that. So people, one of the concerns was that the media attention is so focused on the Palisades fire and not the Altadena. And also, secondly, like we had the North Carolina hurricanes, but that people aren't really paying attention to that anymore. But with the California fires, because it's affecting like the wealthy, that people are also focused on it. But I also, and then they were talking about, some of the things I saw online was talking about like the different responses that Altadena and Palisades were getting. But it's not just about socioeconomic differences, but also Altadena is actually an unincorporated part of LA County versus Palisades is an incorporated part of LA City. So it kind of makes sense that the more support is going to Palisades just because it is part of LA City, but definitely on a national scale, you see different levels of attention. And then these are some of the things about rebuilding and Rick Caruso. Have you guys ever heard of him, Rick Caruso? Yeah. So, you have. So he owns one of the most iconic malls in LA City, and his daughter actually owned a house in the Palisades, and it was burned down. And so he set a new foundation to expedite rebuilding efforts. So we see a lot of private sector in both Altadena and Palisades working together with the government to rebuild, because just the government by itself isn't going to be able to do it. How are we doing on time?
Oh no, yeah, you're good.
Okay. And then, so what's next? We have to rebuild, you know, we're moving on. So the permits to rebuild Los Angeles is now the next big thing. And I don't know if we have time to watch a short video, do we? Or I can describe it.
Yeah, maybe. I'm interested.
Take the
Yeah.
time. Take all the time.
Yeah.
I think if your eyes have it, it should, okay. So this is a woman who lost her home in May.
To clean up. To clean up. The pool was filled with, I don't even want to, dead animals that were trying to escape the fire, toxins from the house, but I couldn't drain the pool. And I have been through it, and everything that Adam Carolla is saying about good luck getting your permit to rebuild, it took me a year to get a permit to clean up. To clean up. The pool was filled with, I don't even want to, dead animals that were trying to escape the fire, toxins from the house, but I couldn't drain the pool. A year just to clean up the fire damage, to get a permit to clean up the fire damage. This is just beginning in California.
So this is a video that I saw when the fire was happening, and there was a lot of talk about like how are we going to rebuild, and I don't really know her too well, but she lost her home in 2018. And yeah, the Woolsey fire, which hit Malibu, which is near Pacific Palisades. And this, she's talking about how to clean out her pool, it took a year. This is not to rebuild her house, this is to clean up. And so the permit process. So at that time, I don't think it affected as many homes as it did in this fire. And with this fire, obviously, everyone's thinking we can't delay this like we did in the previous fires, like we need to expedite. And I think that's on every level, Trump obviously, but Newsom, as well as LA County Supervisor and the LA City Mayor, everyone is on board and agrees that we need to expedite the process, because we can't just have these homes be sitting for, 5 years just to be in this mess. So Trump came 3 days after he was inaugurated to California to meet with the LA Mayor and the city councils, and he talked about how he wants them to act faster to allow victims to rebuild, and Newsom also signed executive orders to rebuild the homes, and then LA County Supervisor and the Mayor also signed these bills to get rid of the red tape that California historically has. So rebuilding process, so people are now deciding, do they want to rebuild or sell? And it's a very personal decision, because for some people, they don't want to wait to rebuild. They just want to move to a new city and cash out what they can. but there's obviously the insurance coverage problem, and then not everybody has the flexibility to move elsewhere, especially if you have other family members or little kids. So, you know, everybody has a long and difficult road ahead to rebuild, because first, you have to get cleaned up, you've got to take out the debris, power, gas has to be repaired, then permits, which we touched on. And then the other thing is builder shortage. So when all these people are trying to build homes, we always had a builder shortage, but with this, and then the deportation is how the immigration issues that we're having, like how that's gonna influence the builder shortage, you know, we'll find out, but definitely there's gonna be a shortage. And just the estimate for rebuild in an average home in Pacific Palisades, it would cost about $1 million, but in Altadena, it would cost about $260,000 to rebuild, but this price may change depending on the supply and demand. And I think that was the end of our presentation. I hope we touched on the